Hello everyone, welcome to Mentora IAS. I am Safir and I welcome you all to the new session of Current SAAR, the 16-month long free of cost current affairs program brought to you by Mentora IAS. So in this particular session, we are going to cover the subject of Indian polity from the month of February 2025. Okay, and this particular session will be dedicated to the union budget. Okay, so we are going to analyze the union budget with respect to the polity point of view. Okay, so we are going to discuss first of all the various announcements that have been made in the budget of 2025-2026. We are going to look into that. We'll be having a cursory look. Very briefly, we'll be looking into the various schemes, what are the steps that have been taken up. Subsequently, we will be focusing our attention more towards the procedural aspect of the union budget. How exactly is the budget presented? What are the constitutional mandates to it? What exactly are the documents presented with the union budget? Subsequently, the various aspects of the basics which UPSC focuses upon while asking the questions. Okay, so when you talk about the union budget, this straight away comes from the chapter of legislature. Okay, you may also call it the chapter of parliament, which is the most important chapter with respect to the number of questions that have been asked historically from the subject of polity. The most number of questions come from parliament and from that legislative procedure. Okay, so one of the most important legislative procedure is basically the passage of union budget. So that is what we are going to do in this particular session. Okay, so before we go ahead, I would want you to please visit and subscribe to the channels over the various social media platforms wherever you are active. Okay, we are there at Instagram, we are there at Facebook, we are there at Telegram, and for that matter the YouTube channel. So if you have not yet subscribed to our channel, please do like and share these videos so that your co-aspirants can also benefit from the knowledge that you are having. Okay, and especially I would want you to join our Telegram channel. Okay, this particular channel is the one where you are going to find out detailed handouts of every single current affairs video that has been there on this particular channel. Okay, now these handouts have been arranged in such a manner that you will not be finding it very difficult to remember and at the same time understand. The only objective is to simplify your task of note making. Okay, so what exactly are you going to do? If you know all the basics which are being covered in the class, the handouts are pretty sufficient for you. If there is any small thing which is missing, which you feel like you do not know properly, only add that much part. So out of spending 20 minutes on a particular article or on a particular topic, spend only 5 to 10 minutes and subsequently boost your preparation for upcoming prelims examination. Now, you will be given a detailed breakdown of the budget which will be presented in February 2026. So in this particular analysis, we are going to have only a cursory or superficial look of the budget. I will be telling you about the major schemes and subsequently what exactly is the procedural aspect. That is the focus of this particular session. Okay, so let us begin with the union budget of 2025-26. Okay, so the union budget is presented by the Union Finance Minister on 1st of February every year. Now this particular arrangement has been in place since 2017. So since 2017 we find that the Union Finance Minister presents the budget on the first day. Before this particular year, the union budget or the general budget as it was called was presented on the last working day of February. Okay, so after 2017, or you can say since 2017, this particular budget has been presented on the first day of February, that is 1st of February. Then subsequently another change that was there in 2017 was the merger of the general budget with the rail budget. Okay, so before 2017 the general budget and the railway budget were presented separately. Okay, subsequently after 2017 these budgets have been integrated together. So before 2017 the general budget would be presented by the finance minister and the railway budget would be presented by the railway minister. Okay, but after 2017 we see that both of these aspects have been combined together and it is now called the union budget, which is presented by the Union Finance Minister. Okay, so when we talk about the union budget, so this is basically an estimate. Okay, this is a document which has estimates and at the same time accounts, or you can say calculations of 3 different years. Okay, so let me tell you that very clearly. The first year that it is going to talk about is going to be the year which is going to start. Okay, so this will be the current year or current financial year. Okay, now for this particular year, what we are going to have, we will be having estimates. For this year we will be having estimates. Now this budget is also going to have, you can say, figures which will be considered revised figures for the year 2024-25. So it will have the figures of 2024-25 and these will be known as revised figures. Okay, and subsequently it will also have another year with itself for which it will be having actual figures, and that will be for the year 2023-24. Okay, so for this it will be having actual figures. So when you talk about a budget document, it basically comprises these 3 years, of which most important one is the current financial year, which will begin from 1st of April. Okay, so I'll just be telling you that as well. So what happens is that this particular budget becomes important because it is the way in which the government expresses two things. Okay, what exactly is the expenditure it is expecting to do in the current year, in the coming year. Okay, and then subsequently the second thing, what is the amount of earning, okay, or revenue it is expecting to gain, or it is expecting to earn in the year which is going to come up. Okay, so basically that is the most important part of it, because that concerns ourselves with the current year in which we will be having the economy running. Okay, apart from that, these two are basically there in order for the parliament to scrutinize what exactly has been the fiscal prudence or the fiscal or financial accountability of the government. Okay, so this is basically what exactly is present in the union budget document. So now when you talk about financial year, okay, so financial year in India, which is abbreviated as FY, okay, this is something that is actually starting from 1st of April, begins on 1st April and subsequently it ends on 31st March. Okay, so basically what does this mean? That when you talk about financial year, let us say we want to talk about financial year 2025-26. Okay, so when you talk about this particular year, so it begins on 1st April 2025. Okay, this is the date on which this particular year begins. Then it ends on 31st of March 2026. So that is why you see that the financial year basically has been always written like this, and it is written like FY in the front, that is the one which is prefixed, and then you have 25-26. So I hope this is clear. So the budget which we are discussing concerns itself with this particular year. Okay, so let us first of all understand what exactly has been the major announcements with respect to the budget. Okay, so when we talk about this particular budget, this budget was opened up by the Union Finance Minister by a famous Telugu poet's line, that is Honorable G. Apparao. So basically she opened up her speech with his lines that a country is not just its soil but its people. Okay, and subsequently she highlighted some principles for Viksit Bharat. Okay, so when we talk about the principles of Viksit Bharat, these were the ones which were highlighted. So what exactly is Viksit Bharat? Viksit Bharat is basically the vision that India will become developed by 2047, that is marking 100 years of our independence. Okay, so when we talk about Viksit Bharat, this will be the vision of making India a developed nation by 2047. Okay. So the Union Finance Minister actually outlined some of the principles which are going to be involved with respect to the concept of Viksit Bharat. And the first principle was zero poverty, which also finds resonance from the Sustainable Development Goals Agenda 2030 or SDGs if you know it. Okay. The second one is basically access to high quality school education. Okay, that's the next thing that has been there. Then the third one basically has been access to high quality and affordable health care. Okay. Then subsequently it talks about inclusivity. It talks about 70% of women engaged in economic activities. Okay. So that basically has an element of women empowerment and women's participation in economic activities. Okay. Finally, it also talks about making farmers prosperous. Subsequently, making India the food basket of the world. Okay, that is basically the principles of Viksit Bharat that have been outlined by the Union Finance Minister with respect to this particular budget. Okay, so now this particular budget highlights 4 engines to reach towards the Viksit Bharat phenomenon. Okay, so these 4 engines that have been identified for development have been agriculture, micro, small, medium enterprises, investments, and subsequently export promotion. So most of the budget actually highlights on giving a significant amount of push to all of these sectors. Okay, so we will be discussing some of the prominent announcements that have been made in this particular budget with regards to these sectors. But before we go there, we should also understand a very important piece of information: how rupee is earned and where exactly is rupee spent. Okay, so this is basically where exactly the rupee comes from. Okay, where does the rupee come from? That's the first figure that we have here. So when we talk about it, so we see that there are 2 major components from where rupee actually comes towards the government for the expenditure. Okay, the first one, which is the primary source of income, is basically income tax and corporate tax. So corporation tax, income tax, and GST. These 3, if you are seeing, they basically are the ones which comprise most of the money that the government actually receives. Okay, so if you have to actually sum them together, it will be 57% of the rupee comes from income tax, GST and other taxes, that is basically the indirect taxes, and the corporation tax, that is the income taxes paid by the company. Okay, then subsequently another major chunk of rupee comes from borrowings and other liabilities. Basically the way in which government securities are issued, various kinds of loans are the ones which are taken by the government. So the money that comes in from there, that is the second major source of you can say the source of rupee income. Okay, or coming up of the rupee. So if you talk in absolute terms, that is the single largest source. Okay, but if you talk about in terms of the sum that the government earns versus the liabilities, because liabilities are the one that you have to pay off. Okay, so the one that the government earns, major part of it comes from income tax, corporation tax, and GST and other taxes. Okay, then apart from that, 9% comes from non-tax receipts, then union excise duties, 4% from customs, and non-debt capital receipts, that is basically 1%. Okay, so these are basically the other headings from which rupee is earned by the government. Okay, so that is basically how we see that major base of any government is basically taxation. So that is why the wider the taxation, the greater the compliance with taxation, the bigger the resource which is present with the government, and subsequently the easier for the government to finance the welfare schemes or social sector schemes of the day. Subsequently, the second thing that is very, very important for us to understand is that if the compliance is not so great, so what is going to happen? You will be having great amount of liabilities. You will have to require more amount of loans in order to fulfill your mandate of welfare. Okay, so that is why all the governments always want that more and more people should be paying the taxes, and at the same time these taxes are to be made simpler so that people do not try to evade it. Okay, that's the first thing that we need to understand. Now the second thing, where exactly is the rupee spent? Now that's the very important part. We have got an expenditure. How do we spend it? So the biggest share of the rupee expenditure is basically the devolution that is done to the states. Okay, so if you know about the finance commission, so finance commission basically recommends to the central government what is the amount of revenue that it has to share with the states. So subsequently then what happens is that 22% of the money that is earned is the one which is actually given off as distribution to the states. Okay, then the second biggest one is basically repaying the other liabilities that we have already created. So you have seen 24% of the rupee that is earned is from the loans and borrowings. So you have to service the debt. So the next major part of it basically goes for interest payments, and this is exactly what we want to optimize. We do not want to have a significant amount of loan on our head. Why? Because this is only going to impoverish us. So this is something that we need to optimize always. Then we have central sector schemes. Okay, so central sector schemes are basically those schemes which are run by the central government and completely financed by them. Okay, so these schemes are the next biggest spenders of the rupee, that is 16%. Defense accounts for 8%. Then finance commission related other grants are 8%, other expenditure is 8%, subsidies that the government extends to the farmers, to the industrialists, to the MSMEs, that accounts for 6%, and 4% is basically pensions. Okay, so this is something which the government again is finding that this is something which is rising, this is something which is swelling. Okay, with regards to this, if I have to make a parallel, right now there is also some amount of chaos that is going on in France, because France as of now is staring at a very, very deep financial crisis. It does not have money to service this part of their obligation, that is pensions to the people, and subsequently they want to reduce drastically the pension obligation, and that is something which is creating a lot of turmoil in France. Okay, so subsequently India has also recognized this, that these pensions are basically of the retired personnel, of that of the defense personnel, subsequently all the central government employees, the judges, okay, the former you can say representatives of the government, the former presidents and prime ministers, they all receive pensions. That is 4% of the total expenditure as of now. So this is basically how we see that we have to balance the income and expenditure. When we do that, only then can we say that we have a balanced budget. Okay, if we basically have any kind of you can say extra spending, so that extra spending can only be done by borrowing. So that is what we are going to learn towards the end, what exactly are the various deficits. Okay, now what exactly have been the major highlights of the budget? So with respect to agriculture, the first one is basically the coming up of the Pradhan Mantri Dhan Dhanya Yojana. Okay, Dhan Dhanya Krishi Yojana. So this is basically a scheme which will be run as a pilot scheme for 100 districts. Okay, it will be run in 100 districts across all the states, and the objective here is basically to encourage crop diversification, then at the same time irrigation facilities, that is the next thing. Then it talks about post harvest management. Okay, so after harvesting, how exactly the crop or the produce is being managed, because what happens is that because India does not have a lot of warehousing facility, so most of the post harvest produce either has to be sold off immediately or it is something which becomes soiled. Okay, because they are all perishable. So that is why it is very important that post-harvest management is something which has to be very carefully understood and at the same time done in order to ensure two things: limited spillage of food, and second, ensuring food security. Because if there is a lot of wastage of the food, what is going to happen? The food is going to be short in the market, for that matter short with the government as well, and subsequently what we are going to do? We are going to see a shortage, and that is something which will result in food security and associated aspects. Okay. The next one is basically National Mission on High Yielding Seeds. So India as of now has understood one thing, that climate change has to be adapted, and in order for that to be for that adaptation to take place, what has to be done? High yielding variety of seeds have to be developed and at the same time commercially available. So when we talk about the National Mission for High Yielding Seeds, so this is something which is going to encourage research. Okay, so I will be writing high yielding seeds as HYVs. Okay, so the first objective here is to encourage research in high yielding seeds. Okay, subsequently the next thing is basically producing commercially viable high yield pest resistant and climate resilient seeds. Okay, so this is basically the part where we want to talk about the warming climate and subsequently how exactly the seeds have to be made. Okay, the next thing, commercial release of 100 high yielding varieties developed since July 2024. Okay, so they have to be given off to the farmers. Subsequently they are the ones which will be used for the purpose of agriculture. Okay, so that is basically what is the National Mission for High Yielding Varieties of Seeds. The next one that we have is basically called Atmanirbharta in pulses. Now what happens is that with respect to India is the largest producer as well as consumer of pulses. Okay, so India basically produces the largest quantity, but the demand is so high that we are also the largest consumer of pulses. So again, this is something which adds on to the money that is to be spent for importing the pulses. So that is why this is basically going to be a 6-year long, rupees 1000 crore project. Okay, the objective here is basically to become self-sufficient in pulses production. Okay, the next thing that is present here is basically the focus. So it basically has focus on 3 different varieties of pulses. So they are Tur, also known as Arhar. Okay, there is Masoor, and the third one is Udad. Okay, so these are the 3 varieties of pulses that we are focusing upon. Okay, and this is overall expected that we are going to develop such high yielding varieties and such irrigation and such cultivation practices that this is going to be boosting the overall production of Tur, Masoor and Urad. Further, at the same time, it also ensures that the cooperative marketing through National Agricultural Cooperative Federation, okay, NAFED, and National Cooperative Consumer Federation, NCCF, okay, they will procure all the pulses in the market for the next 4 years. So for the next 4 years, now it has been ensured that all the pulses will be procured by NAFED and NCCF. Okay, so this in a way also ensures that the farmer will always be guaranteed the minimum support price. Okay, so that is basically how we see that the Atmanirbharta in pulses has been introduced. Subsequently, what exactly is there is the Makhana board in Bihar. Okay, now when you talk about Bihar, Bihar is the largest producer. About 85% of Makhana, which is basically foxnut. Okay, this is what you also know as foxnut. It is produced in Bihar. Okay, so that is why a Makhana board has been set up for Bihar, and subsequently all the individuals who are actually involved in the Makhana or for that matter foxnut cultivation, they will be organized. Okay, so Makhana growers will be organized as farmer producer organizations or FPOs. Okay, so this is going to ensure that there is not just effective cultivation but also effective marketing of the produce of foxnuts from India. Okay, subsequently then the public sector banks have been told to develop a framework for Grameen credit score. Okay, so as to give the credit to self-help groups. Okay, so the self-help groups and their loan requirements are to be met by the public sector banks, and for that to happen the public sector banks have to actually come up with a framework where they are going to evaluate the credit worthiness of the self-help groups. Okay, and finally there will be a new urea plant that will be set up in Namrup, Assam, which will be the 7th new urea plant since 2019. Okay, so that is the one which will be set up. It has not been commissioned yet. 65% of the plant has been finished. Okay, so that is basically what has been there with respect to agriculture. Now the next sector has been micro, small and medium enterprises, and one of the most important changes which have been brought in by this particular budget has been the widening of the definitions of all the three: micro, small and medium enterprises. Okay, so this particular table actually tells you what exactly were the previous limits and what exactly are the new limits to be classified as micro enterprise, medium enterprise and small enterprise. So earlier what used to happen was that when the investment was about 1 crore rupees, okay, then at that particular time the industry would have been categorized as micro. Now that has been increased to 2.5 crores. Okay, and subsequently the turnover, the annual turnover of this particular company has been increased from 5 crores to 10 crores. So now any enterprise with an investment of 2.5 crores and with an annual turnover up to 10 crores will be categorized as a micro enterprise. Now any industry which has an investment of 25 crores and which has a turnover of about 100 crores throughout the year, it will be categorized as a small enterprise. And any you can say enterprise which has currently the investment up to 125 crores and it has a turnover of about 500 crores, it will be categorized as a medium enterprise. Okay, so these are the new limits. Now earlier limits were for small enterprises, the investment limit was 10 crore rupees and the turnover was 50 crores. Okay, for medium enterprises the investment was 50 crores and the turnover was limited to 250 crores. So what you see is that all of them have been doubled. Okay, so with respect to the investments, they have been doubled by 2.5%, 2.5 by a factor of 2.5. Initially 1 crore, now it is 2.5 crore, and the turnovers have been doubled. Okay, for the classification. Apart from that, the next thing is that the credit guarantee which the government actually provides for the various sectors, they have also been enhanced. Okay, so with respect to that, now the medium, small, micro, small enterprises basically which had a credit guarantee of 5 crore rupees in the earlier regimen, now it will basically be having 10 crore rupees. Okay, that is basically the credit guarantee which will be given by the government. Subsequently, well managed startups which basically had 10 crores as their earlier credit cover, now they will be having a credit cover up to 20 crores. And for all those export oriented MSMEs, the credit guarantee will be given till 20 crores of their term loans. Okay, now why exactly is MSMEs being the focus? Because it has been recognized that MSMEs contribute to 45% okay, of India's exports, they actually come from MSMEs. So that is why it is very important that we facilitate the cost of doing business and ease of doing business for MSMEs. Okay. Apart from that, there has been the National Manufacturing Mission which has been launched. So National Manufacturing Mission actually focuses upon clean and sustainable manufacturing practices that are to be followed in India across all the sizes of the industries. They could be small, medium or large industries. Okay. So with respect to National Manufacturing Mission, we basically focus upon clean technology, availability of technology to MSMEs, and at the same time it is also about improving the productivity of the labor by upskilling, by providing skilling services whatever is required in the market. Okay. So that is basically the National Manufacturing Mission. Okay. Then the next one is basically Nuclear Energy Mission. So when we talk about the Nuclear Energy Mission, so it is basically the objective of the government to increase the output or the generation capacity of the nuclear power plants in India. Okay. So Nuclear Energy Mission, it has also been announced. So this will basically be having an allocation of 20,000 crores. Okay, allocation of rupees 20,000 crores have been allocated for this particular sector. So for the first time, a significant amount of push has been given to nuclear power sector. Okay, so basically the objective is to increase the capacity. Okay, generation capacity has to be increased to 100 gigawatt. Okay, and subsequently, when we talk about this particular nuclear power generation, it is also a very important part that a significant component of it is going to be towards indigenous development of small modular reactors. Okay, so we do not want actually very big kind of power plants, conventional nuclear power plants. Now we are going to focus upon small modular reactors. Okay, so these are basically the reactors which generate electricity by nuclear fission. Okay, generate electricity by nuclear fission. That's the first thing, that they are fission reactors. Okay, second thing, that they basically have the capacity of 300 megawatts. Okay, so one single small modular reactor has the capacity to generate 300 megawatts of electric power. Then subsequently the next thing is that they have smaller components which can be assembled together. That can be assembled together as a single unit. Okay, so much like the diesel generator. If you have seen a diesel generator, so a diesel generator basically is a standalone machine. It actually comes in a box, or for that matter you might have seen the older diesel generators which are mounted over a push cart. Okay, so what exactly happens? That diesel generator is just an engine which is to be fed with diesel in order for it to generate electricity by rotation of the crank. Okay, so basically what happens is that, what do we see? That when we talk about a power plant, so a power plant is huge, acres of land, but just imagine a diesel generator. For that matter, imagine an inverter. So what basically happens is that in this manner, if we start small, you can say reducing the size of the components which are involved, so what is going to happen? That we are going to increase the mobility of that particular product. Okay, now power plants, in order to establish power plants, this is going to be a very huge task with respect to investment, and at the same time it is also going to be a very huge task with respect to execution. Okay, so instead of that, what we are trying to do, that instead of going for a full-fledged power plant, why not go for a generator kind of machine? Okay, where all the components are going to have their sizes reduced, and at the same time it is going to generate an enormous amount of power per second, that is 300 megawatts. Okay, so 300 megajoules of energy is produced per second by one such modular reactor, and depending upon the demand of a particular city or a particular region, what can then be done? It can be scaled up by adding more units. So it is a much better option than to go for a full-fledged power plant every single place. So this is going to be a very important aspect of energy security for the country. Okay, so that is the National Nuclear Energy Mission. Okay, apart from that, there has been a Maritime Development Fund which will be taking care of the development of the maritime economy of the country, and subsequently that is also going to ensure export promotion of the maritime or marine products. Okay, then when we talk about the FDI limit in the insurance sector, for now this has been hiked to 100%. So earlier it was reduced by it, but now 100% via automatic route has been the FDI limit that has been approved, and subsequently now we are trying to attract more of the major players of the global insurers to India in order to come up with their offerings for the country. Okay. Subsequently, it has also been said that all those ministries which are going to be involved in infrastructure development, whatever ministries, roadways, telecom, Department of Space for that matter, DGCA, or for that matter, Ministry of Civil Aviation, Ministry of Defense, whatever is going to be involved in any kind of infrastructure project, it has to come up with a 3-year plan of the pipeline of the projects that it is going to have. And subsequently these three-year plan projects are the ones which will be executed under the public partnership, private partnership model. Okay, so PPP. So that is basically the model that will be taken up by the infrastructure development project. So what exactly is happening? The government is trying to bring in more amount of private players in order to accelerate the infrastructure development of the country. Okay, then subsequently we will be having the investor friendliness index. That is something which will be released by Niti Aayog in association with Department for Promotion of Industries and Internal Trade. So we'll be talking about it a little bit later. So these have been the major highlights with respect to the union budget. Now, when the union budget is presented in the Lok Sabha, what exactly are the documents which are to be placed with respect to the union budget? Okay, so there are two sets of documents. Some of them are constitutionally mandated, and some of them are basically mandated by another act which is called as the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, or FRBM Act of 2003. Okay, so Constitution of India mandates that there has to be an annual financial statement. This is basically the official or constitutional term for budget. Okay, so the Constitution of India does not have the word budget. Okay, official or constitutional term for budget. Remember this, that the Constitution of India, nowhere does it mention that we are going to have a budget. It says there will be an annual financial statement that is to be tabled in both the houses of the parliament. Okay, and it is the responsibility of the president to ensure this is something which is happening every single year. Okay, the next thing that is mandated by Article 113 is the demand for grants. Okay, so these demand for grants are basically the ones which is going to have all the estimated expenditure that is to be done by every single department of the ministry of the government. Okay, so these are the ones which are voted upon, and subsequently that is the money which will be allocated to the various ministries for various projects. The last one is basically a finance bill under Article 110 subsection A. So this is basically the proposal of the taxation reforms that the government wants to bring in order to go for the revenues that it has estimated or it has given under the annual financial statement. So see, basically in the annual financial statement you give an estimate that I estimate that this is the amount of money that I will be earning this year. But in order to give that particular estimate, you have to give your assumptions. How exactly are you going to do that? That is something which is done using the finance bill. Okay. Then subsequently, from the Fiscal Responsibility and Management Act 2003, there are two important documents which are placed. They are macroeconomic framework statement, and the second one is medium term fiscal policy fiscal policy strategy statement. So these are the two which are mandated by the FRBM Act 2003. So these are the two sets of documents which are placed in both the houses of the parliament for scrutiny purposes. Okay, so that's the thing. Now let us talk about the annual financial statement under Article 112. So what we have to understand from this is that when we talk about Article 112, here the President of India, okay, so it is the President of India who's going to ensure, okay, ensures that annual financial statement, I will say AFS, okay, is presented, is tabled in both Lok Sabha as well as Rajya Sabha. This has to be done, okay, and the President of India is responsible for making this happen. The second thing which is to be there is basically the expenditure has to be divided in two heads. Okay, one of them will be revenue expenditure and the other one is other expenditure. Okay, the third thing, this statement has to have two different parts. Okay, this statement will have two different parts. One will be receipts, which we call as earning, and the other one is going to be expenditure. Okay, so these are the two heads on which this particular thing has to be presented. Then the fourth thing, okay, that when you talk about it, the expenses have to be classified in two headings. Okay, expenditure classification has to be done in two parts, and this will be basically expenditure which will be charged upon the consolidated fund of India. Okay, and the second one that we have is basically going to be the one which will be made, okay, expenditure made out of consolidated fund of India. So I am writing that as CFI here. Okay, so these are the things that are there under Article 112. So first of all, the President of India is going to ensure that the statement of the estimated receipts and expenditure is tabled on both the houses of the parliament, Lok Sabha as well as Rajya Sabha. That's the first requirement. The second requirement is that the expenditure, okay, this expenditure has to separately account for the revenue expenditure, the day-to-day running, and the other expenditure. The third thing, that the expenditure also has to be categorized between the ones which is going to be charged upon the consolidated fund of India and the other one which will be made out of the consolidated fund of India. Okay, so when we talk about the expenditure or the budget, okay, expenditure in the budget or annual financial statement as it is called officially has two different parts. Okay, one is called the votable part, okay, and the other one is basically called non-votable part. Okay, so when we talk about the votable part, on this particular thing we say that these expenditure have to be made from consolidated fund of India. Okay, and for this authorization of parliament is required. Authorization or vote of parliament or Lok Sabha specifically is required. Okay, now there is a non-votable part of the expenditure as well. This is the one that we know as the charged expenditure or charged upon the consolidated fund of India. Okay, so this is something which is going to be non-votable. So this is something on which the parliament has only discussion. Okay, so on this part only discussion is allowed. There is no other way of having any kind of vote. You may not agree with the expenditure that is to be made, but it is not going to be entertained. This money has to be given. Consider it like your rent. Okay, if you live in a rented accommodation, doesn't matter if you like that particular amount of money to be spent on something else or not, this amount of money has to be blocked for rent. It has to go even if you live there or not. Okay, so that is basically the thing, that only discussion is allowed, you cannot be stopping this particular expenditure. So that is why in this particular part we basically have the salary and allowances. Okay, we have the salary and allowances of the President of India. Okay, subsequently we have this for the presiding officers of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. So Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, I hope you know the presiding officers. For Lok Sabha they are Speaker and Deputy Speaker. For Rajya Sabha that is Chairperson and Deputy Chairperson. Okay, then at the same time the salary and allowances of judges of Supreme Court. Okay, they are the one who has to be given. Comptroller, Auditor General of India, their salaries and allowances have to be given. Apart from that, there has to be pensions. Okay, so pensions of Supreme Court and High Court judges, that is to be given. Apart from that, any debt servicing that is to be done. Okay, debt servicing is basically also a part of the charged expenditure. Apart from that, any other expenditure that is to be made based upon an order given by a court or tribunal. So let us say any court or tribunal has actually ordered that the government of India has to pay such amount of money to a particular entity or an organization, that will be a charged expenditure. So these are basically the ones which are the non-votable part. It cannot be stopped. Okay, so that is the classification of the two. Now talking about the demand for grants. Now this is basically the one which will be the votable part of the expenditure. Okay, so demand for grant is something which is presented for each ministry. Presented for each ministry. So it is basically the one which is going to allocate money. Okay, this is for allocating money to every ministry. To every ministry, or for that matter the departments. Okay, so what happens is that when you talk about what exactly is the monetary requirement for running for an entire year for a particular ministry or a department of the central government, that is sought from it by the finance ministry before chalking up or drawing up the budget. Okay, so in the month of January they are going to send out this particular letter to all the ministries and all the departments operating under the central government for their financial implication for the coming year. Okay, now all of these are going to be then included in the demand for grant, because grant is something which is given but it is not taken back. Okay, so grant is something like you have been granted this amount of money but you do not have the obligation to return this money back to the giver. So that is why that is called as a grant. So demand for grant is basically the way in which the allocation of the monetary requirement of every ministry is presented in front of the you can say the parliament. Okay, now this is something which has to be you can say presented in the form of money bills. Okay, so they are going to be introduced into the Lok Sabha, and the Lok Sabha has the sole authority of voting. Sole authority of voting or approving demand for grants. Okay, so subsequently what happens is that the demand for grants are also going to be the one where the cut motions are going to be introduced. Okay, so cut motions are basically such motions in which the parliamentarians, they basically want to draw the attention of the government over the way in which money is going to be spent. So demand for grant is going to be the part where you will be having scrutiny. Every single department is brought into the scrutiny. How exactly is it utilizing its funds, and subsequently what exactly could be optimized or economized. So that is why when you talk about cut motions, there are three types of cut motions. One of them is disapproval of policy. Okay, disapproval of policy. The second one is economy cut, and the third one is token cut. Okay, so in terms of disapproval of policy, basically what happens is that the MPs are not happy with the government. Okay, MPs reject the policy behind a scheme or any expenditure. Okay, so basically what happens is that they say that this particular scheme is worth only ₹1. Okay, whatever is the amount of money that you want to actually allocate to this particular scheme or this particular department, they deserve only ₹1. Okay, why? Because they have no idea about how to manage this money. So this is the strongest kind of cut. The second one is economy cut. So it basically says that you would want the entire allocation to be reduced to a certain amount. Okay, so you will be saying that a certain amount is the one which should be given instead of the amount that has been sought. Okay, and the third one is token cut. So token cut basically says that let us reduce the amount by ₹100, and this is just in order to get the attention of the government towards a particular grievance of the MPs. So this is basically the one on which cut motions can be introduced, and this is the one which will be the votable part of the budget. Okay, then talking about the finance bill under Article 110A. So first of all, Article 110, this defines money bill. Okay, it defines a money bill. So what exactly would be the contents of money bill have been given under the various subsections of this particular article. Okay, so under this particular article, what exactly are present? The first one, the you can say imposition of a tax, modification of a tax, complete abolition of a tax, remission of a tax. That is something which is present under Article 110A. Okay, then the second one is basically the consolidated fund of India, the contingency fund of India, the public accounts of India, who will be having the authority of custody. So the custody of these three funds. The third one, drawing out any money from consolidated fund of India, from contingency fund of India, that is something which comes under the financial in terms of the money bill. So these are the various things that are actually included, and there is a very strict definition of what exactly is a money bill. Okay, so out of that, the first one, the first provision is basically about the taxation structure. So Article 110A. Okay, so Article 110A, it basically tells us about the imposition, abolition, remission or modification of a tax. Okay, so in order for the government to impose a tax, there are only two ways. Okay, either it should be mandated by the Constitution of India, or it has to be approved by the Parliament of India. So only through an authority of law can you impose a tax on the people. You cannot be imposing the tax on the people on your whims and policies. So that is basically why Article 110A specifically deals with this particular provision. Okay, that when the government says it wants to, it estimates that this is the amount of money that it would be shoring up or it is going to earn up from the revenues. So in order to do that, what exactly is your proposal for taxation? Okay, how exactly are you going to modify the taxation structure? Subsequently, how exactly your tax base is going to widen? Okay, so that is why it is customary that after the finishing up of the entire budget speech of the Union Finance Minister, it is followed by this particular bill. Okay, so this is for the information of the member of parliament, so that they could be understanding how exactly the government is going to attain the amount of figures that it has already promised. So that is the finance bill under Article 110, which is a money bill. Okay, it's a money bill. So we'll be discussing all of these in a later detailed discussion of polity. So now when we talk about the procedure, okay, so when we talk about the procedure of budget, so the first thing is basically going to be presentation of budget. So the presentation of budget actually happens in the Lok Sabha. Okay, this happens in the Lok Sabha, and subsequently a copy of speech, a copy of budget and speech is tabled in Rajya Sabha. Okay, that's the thing. Then after the presentation of budget, it is followed by the presentation of finance bill. That's the next thing. Okay, that the finance bill that we have just seen, that is needed to be presented. So that will be the one which will be presented. Again, the copy of this is going to go to Rajya Sabha. Then the third thing, after this has happened, then what is going to happen? There will be discussion. Okay, so there will be discussion. So this discussion actually has got two phases. It has got two phases. Okay, the first one is general discussion. Okay, and the second one is detailed discussion. So in the general discussion, the overall budgetary output, the macroeconomic framework, the fiscal policy and the fiscal health, these are the things that are discussed. Okay, so this is something that happens in the next 3-4 days after the presentation of the budget, and this basically happens in both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. In both of them this happens. Okay, and then subsequently there is a recess. There is a 1 month recess, and then subsequently a detailed discussion follows in Lok Sabha. Okay, so during this 1 month of recess, what happens is that there are 17 departmentally related standing committees which have the primary mandate of evaluating the demand for grants that have been forwarded by every single department and ministry. So these departmentally related standing committees are the ones who are going to in detail scrutinize all of them, and subsequently they are going to report their findings to the Lok Sabha. Okay, so the fourth stage will basically be detailed discussion in Lok Sabha. Okay, this is the one which will then be followed by voting. So when the detailed discussion is going on, this is basically the time when the cut motions are going to be introduced. Okay, so cut motions are introduced here, and subsequently then what happens is that after the discussion has been done, voting takes place. Okay, and after the voting what happens is that the budget is approved. Subsequently then what happens, then comes the concept of appropriations bill. So when you talk about appropriation, so appropriation is basically the way in which the government is going to seek authorization from the Lok Sabha for taking out money from the Consolidated Fund of India. So in order to do that, you basically have to come up with a law. That law is basically called appropriation bill. So the appropriation bill will be the one which will be presented in the Lok Sabha, and there all the demand for grants, all the expenditure on which the approval has been given, they are the ones which are going to be approved. Subsequently, it will be attested by the Speaker of the Lok Sabha as a money bill. It will be sent to the Rajya Sabha. Then at the same time, after following the entire procedure of the money bill, it will come back within 14 days with or without amendments, and the Lok Sabha has the discretion to either accept the amendments or completely reject them, and subsequently it is deemed to be passed. Okay, so after the appropriation bill, can you take out money from the Consolidated Fund of India, and then subsequently it will be disbursed. Take out money from Consolidated Fund of India, and then subsequently it will be disbursed to the various authorities, various ministries and departments. So this is basically the procedure of the budget. Okay, so that is all that is there with respect to the budget, and the next and small part that is there with respect to the budget is the fiscal deficit. So now we talk about the deficits. So there are three primary deficits, and why exactly a deficit comes? Deficit comes up whenever your income is less but your expenditure is more. So whenever your expenditure is going to be high but the income is going to be less, so there will always be some amount of money which you will be short of, and then subsequently in order to fulfill that amount of money you will have to borrow. So fiscal deficit is basically that particular thing. So fiscal deficit is basically the indicator. It is the indicator of the borrowings that the government has to do. That the government has to do to finance its expenditure or finance its excess expenditure. Okay, so that is basically what is the fiscal deficit. So when we talk about the fiscal deficit is basically total expenditure minus total revenue. or you could be doing, if you basically want to do it total revenue minus total expenditure, that is also fine. The only difference is you'll be getting a negative value. Okay, so the difference between the revenue and expenditure is basically what is the fiscal deficit, and this amount of money which you are short of has to be borrowed from the market. Okay, that is fiscal deficit. Now the second type of deficit is actually revenue deficit. So revenue deficit is basically the difference between revenue earned and revenue expenditure. So basically in the daily running of the government, you basically are actually having greater amount of expenditure than the amount of money that you are actually earning. So the difference between the two is actually called revenue deficit. So in order to cut down the revenue deficit, the government has to scrutinize wasteful expenditure that happens in the day-to-day running of the government. So you want to economize the entire process. Okay, that is revenue deficit. And then the final one is primary deficit. So primary deficit is basically fiscal deficit minus interest payments. Okay, that is basically what is the primary deficit. So fiscal deficit minus interest payments is basically what is the primary deficit, and this basically tells you that apart from the interest that you have to give to the various borrowings that you have done, what is the amount of you can say imbalance that you have in the deficit. Okay, so these are the three indicators of the financial health of the government and of that of the economy. If the deficits are high and they are unmanageable, there will be great amount of borrowing, and whenever the borrowing is going to be great, you are going to see that there will be enormous load upon debt servicing. You will not be able to use that amount of money for the purpose of economic development. So this is basically the trends in the deficit that have been there since 2023. So we see a downward trend. The current rate of fiscal deficit is basically 4.4. Now this is basically always expressed as a percentage of GDP. Okay, that is basically how we have the fiscal deficit. So we see that all fiscal deficit, revenue deficit and primary deficit, all of them have a declining trend between 2022 to 2025-2026. So we see that the fiscal deficit currently stands at 4.4%. Now how exactly do we finance the deficit? Okay, so in India, deficit financing through RBI has been stopped after the FRBM Act and since 1997. So before that, what used to happen, whatever was the deficit that used to come, the government would ask RBI to print more amount of money to finance for the deficit. So what would happen is that once the deficit has been fulfilled, now there is more amount of currency that is flowing in the economy. This is something which would lead to inflation, because the erosion, there will be an erosion in the value of money. There is more amount of money which is present, but the amount of goods which you are going to get for the same amount of money is going to be less. Okay, so that is why more money, less things. That is what you used to see with respect to inflation. Now after that, what has been the major sources of deficit financing? So with respect to India, as of now, the highest share of deficit financing comes from market borrowings. Okay, so most of the you can say the deficit financing, or for that matter the deficit, has been financed using the market borrowing. So market borrowings are basically done using the issue of government securities, the investment trust bonds, and these are basically the way in which the government takes in the money and subsequently then it services this particular debt. So that is the single largest component of the debt. Apart from that, it also raises some amount of money from short-term borrowing like T-bills. So the treasury bills are basically the bills which are actually loans that are taken for a short period of time. That is basically either for 91 days or for that matter 182 days or 364 days. So within a year, if you basically have short-term amount of loan that is to be taken, it is called as T-bills. So that is called short-term borrowing. Then securities against small savings. So whatever are the savings that the people keep with the government in the form of provident fund, in the form of national pension scheme, some other smaller funds. So what happens is that the government has a pool of money over which it can be borrowing. Okay, so subsequently that is the next part. So securities against the small savings, and then the others, that is basically the one which is basically the least as of now. So small savings, short-term borrowing and others are basically the smallest part. The largest part is market borrowing, and then the second largest part is securities against small savings. Okay, so these are the major sources of deficit financing in the country. Now, in this particular year's union budget, another thing that has been announced is basically the Deregulation Commission. So deregulation is basically the act in which the government actually wants to liberalize, it wants to reduce the amount of government oversight over the industry so that there could be freer economic activities, and at the same time the economic activities do not get hindrances from the government. So you basically do this in order to reduce the amount of compliance burden and at the same time to improve the ease of doing business. So that was something which was actually announced in the union budget, and subsequently the Prime Minister of India, he actually set up a deregulation commission, which will be a high power body that is going to evaluate all those unnecessary regulations apart from the financial sector, which can be simplified, for that matter which can be eliminated, and subsequently what could be done in that way is that we could be improving the ease of doing business in the country. Okay, so this is something which is going to enhance the ease of doing business, and at the same time it will also reduce the cost of doing business in the country. Okay, so this is basically what we want to achieve from this particular you can say deregulation commission. So it is expected that within the year it is going to give out this particular recommendation, and subsequently the government is going to rationalize the amount of government interference with respect to setting up or for that matter leaving the industry. Okay, so that is the deregulation commission that is going to be set up. Then investor friendliness index is the one which has also been announced. This is going to be the one which will promote competitive cooperative federalism. Okay, it is going to promote competitive cooperative federalism. So what is going to happen is that this particular index is going to evaluate, it is going to evaluate the ability of the states, to attract investment, to attract investors and industries. So subsequently what is going to happen is that this is something which is going to ensure that the people are actually the one who are going to get the benefit of the investment of the industries, because if the industries and the investments are coming to the state, that will result in the generation of employment, and subsequently the people are going to be meaningfully employed. So that is why this particular index will be developed by Niti Aayog. Okay, so Niti Aayog is responsible for developing it. Okay, and subsequently it will be released by Niti Aayog in association with the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade. They both are going to release this particular thing, and this is going to work for both the government as well as for the industries. For the government, it is basically how creative can they become in order to promote investor friendliness in their state, and subsequently for the investors to compare what exactly are the benefits and disadvantages of investing in a particular state. Okay, so that is basically what will be done using the investor friendliness index. This index has not yet been released. Okay, it was expected to be released in an earlier date, but it has not yet been released. Okay, so this is the question that we have based upon all the discussions that we have till now. So the first question is, consider the following statements. No money can be withdrawn from the Consolidated Fund of India without the approval of the Parliament. The appropriation bill is presented by the government to withdraw the money from the Consolidated Fund of India. Appropriation bill is an ordinary bill. How many of the above statements is or are correct? So no money can be withdrawn from the Consolidated Fund of India without the approval of the Parliament. This is correct. That yes, Parliament's approval is required. That is the whole point of having an appropriations bill. The second one is, appropriation bill is presented by the government to withdraw money from the Consolidated Fund of India. This is also correct, that this is the objective of having the appropriations bill. The third one, appropriation bill is an ordinary bill. This is wrong. It is a money bill. It is not an ordinary bill. So how many of the above statements are correct? So only 2 statements of the 3 are correct here. Okay, so this is the question for you. The next one is basically a previous year question from UPSC 2020. So the question goes like, along with the budget, the finance minister also places other documents before the Parliament which include the macroeconomic framework statement. The aforesaid document is presented because this is mandated by the long-standing parliamentary convention, Article 112 and Article 110 subsection 1 of the Constitution of India, Article 113 of the Constitution of India, Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act 2003. So I've just told you that macroeconomic framework statement and fiscal medium term fiscal policy fiscal policy strategy statement is something which is presented to the Lok Sabha and the Parliament under the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act of 2003 or the FRBM Act. Okay, so these were basically the questions which have been there from budget. There have been recent questions as well, okay, and which we'll be practicing in detail in the classroom, so don't worry about it. I hope that this particular session gave you not just a cursory look of the union budget but also a detailed analysis of the procedure of the budget and some of the minute details with respect to polity which we have to understand. Okay, so if you have any doubt, please let us know in the comment section, and if not, please share this with others as well. One video is going to solve your entire procedural doubt with respect to annual financial statement or the budget. Okay, so read this properly and subsequently be very sure that you are applying the concepts correctly during the examination. So hoping that you're doing your best, and stay tuned for the next video. Thank you very much. Take care.